Okay, now we want to see if we can put this all together. So we're going to do page 5 and page 6 separately. We've got 4 separate examples. First 2 are kind of nice. We're not worried about any kind of phase shift. So we're going to focus on amplitude, period, and vertical shift. Okay, so let's start with what we've got here on exercise 6A. The amplitude is that number out front right here. And so we've got an amplitude of 4 in our function f of theta equals 4 times the sine of 3 theta plus 2. Just a reminder, we find the period by finding 2 pi over b. So our period is 2 pi, our b is 3. That means one complete cycle will happen in that span of 2 pi over 3. Phase shift, we don't have anything that we're subtracting from the theta, so there is no phase shift on this one. Our vertical shift, our plus 2 part, so we've got a vertical shift of 2. Now here's the thing, the important values. If you think about it, we divide our period into 4 equal parts. We've got the start, we've got the end, we've got the middle, and then we've got the 2 points that are in the middle of the bottom half, the middle of the top half, okay? So here's what I'm going to do to find my important values, to figure out how far I need to space this, because you notice this graph does not have anything labeled. I'm going to take my period, and I'm going to divide it into 4 equal parts. So I get what here? 2 pi over 12. Okay. So that means as I go to graph this, I start at 0, and then I'm counting by pi over 6. So I've got pi over 6. I'm going to put it down here, 2 pi over 6, because I know I can reduce that to pi over 3. Same thing here, 3 pi over 6, which reduces to pi over 2. And then 4 pi over 6, which reduces to 2 pi over 3. Those 5 points are going to divide my period into 4 equal parts. So here's the nice thing up here. I'm not worried about cramming things into spaces that are too small or running out of room, unless I plan poorly, which tends to happen at some point. I am just counting by pi over 6s. So I've got 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6. I might as well finish up here, 5 pi over 6, and then pi. Okay, we're not going to use all of this, but that is what I've done here. Darn it. Pi over 6, pi over 3, pi over 2, 2 pi over 3. There we go, back in there. Okay, so let's start with a couple of things. I want to start with that vertical shift. Everything's erasing. That's not helpful. And so we've got a vertical shift. Let's see, how do we want to number this? Just count by 2s. Not even close. So what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sure. And that makes this -1, -2, -3. We're good. So we can match this up. My vertical shift was 2. So that's where I'm going to move my midline to. Okay, that means I'm moving this whole graph up 2 units. And now we are graphing the sine function. Sine at 0 is 0. Okay, 2 units up puts it right on my midline. Keep in mind, we know what the sine function looks like. It's going to go up. It's going to hit 0 in the middle. And then it's going to hit 0 back at the end of this period. Notice that's at 2 pi over 3. Okay, my amplitude tells me how far I go up and down. So here at pi over 6, that first maximum, from 2, I go up 4. That puts me at 6. At pi over 2, that's my next middle point. That's going to be my minimum. I go 4 down from 2. That puts me at -2. Right there. And then I just want to sketch what I know that sine curve is supposed to look like. Hitting these important points that I just plotted. For now, we are just going to graph one period. Keep in mind, this repeats on both sides. And there we go. That is 6a. So let's take a look at 6b. 6b, we've got f of theta equals -3 times the cosine of theta over 2 plus 1. So let's crank through these numbers again. First off, the amplitude, absolute value of -3. So 3 up and down from the midline. We have got 1/2 theta, so b is our 1/2. Our period is 2 pi divided by 1/2. 2 pi times 2 gives us a period of 4 pi. Our phase shift, again, we're not adding or subtracting anything to that theta over 2, so we don't have a phase shift. Our vertical shift is 1. Our important values, again, we want to take that 4 pi period and divide it into 4 equal parts. So these are going to be pi apart. So 0, 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. There's my whole period. So when I go up here to graph this, 0, I'm counting by pi's. Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. There was not enough room for me to double those up or spread those out anymore, so we're good with that. Notice the spacing looks a lot like the one above. It's all how we label that x-axis. Okay, so we have got a vertical shift of 1. Let me go ahead and change. Let's figure out how we're going to number these. And then we've got an amplitude of 3, so I've got to be able to go 3 up from 1 and 3 down. So I'm just going to count by 2's again. Not going to really think too hard. -1. That's not where -2 goes. -2, -3. And keep in mind, I haven't done this. I didn't do this up above, but we could count the other way as well. Perfectly fine. Okay, so we've got a vertical shift of 1. So here is my new midline. Depending on what my graph paper is like, I tend to label the midline so I don't get it confused with some of the crosshatch or that markings on the graph paper. Okay. This is a cosine. So at 0, the cosine is 1. Okay. So if this were just a standard cosine from my midline, I'd be going up 1 to here. But take a look at that number in front. First off, my amplitude is 3. So instead of going up 1, I would go up 3. but it's a -3. So what we're going to do from here, we're going to flip the whole thing over, and from my midline, I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3. That should be exactly where this graph ends. So I'm going to go ahead and put that ending point over on the 4 pi, the other end of the period. Okay, it's cosine, so halfway between, that's going to be at 2 pi. I'm going to move to the other side of my midline. So instead of going 3 down, I'm going to go 3 up. So 1, 2, I'm at 4. And then I know at those two midpoints, I'm hitting the midline, what would be the 0. And then I'm going to sketch my curve in. Okay. If I wanted to, I mean, I could add 5 pi, that's going to be back at 0. 6 pi, that's going to be back up at 4. Right? This is cyclical, so it's just going to keep repeating. And we could do that on the other side as well. Totally up to you, 1 period or more. And that is it for 6A and B, page 5.